Yeah, I think all participants are in.
Okay. Shall we start?
Yes, sir. I'll just give a very small introduction briefing. With that, we will hand it over to you. Yeah, good evening, all of you, and good morning to all those who are joining from US. First of all, our sincere apology. There was a small technical issue that made us to wait for some more time. And we are excited. The Indian Institute of Plantation Management is excited to hold the third webinar series on the topic of food processing sector. And today, in this particular meeting, we have eminent speakers from different field. One of the faculty members will be introducing the speakers. But before that, I just wanted to, for the benefit of the speakers, I wanted to tell you that the participants are all from the people from food processing sector, researchers, scholars, students, and also someone who wanted to have a startup in food processing sector. So this is a very group. There are so much interested to know about what is happening in the food processing sector. So as you all know, this pandemic crisis has made an impact on everyone, every individual, professional life or careers, maybe every business unit and every sector. Food processing sector is not an exemption to that. And putting a lot of challenges both in the supply concern and also the demand concerns, especially the shift in the consumers, consumption pattern, nutrition concerns, and consumer confidence. So all this leads to what we call as transformations in the food system. So today we have eminent speakers. So this platform will be interacting, or it's a platform to bring in the academic and people from the industry to bring people closer, the industry people closer to the academic and academic closer to the industry. So with this very briefing, on behalf of Indian Institute of Plantation Management and our director, Dr. V.G. Dhanakumar, we welcome all of you to this interactive session. Indian Institute of Plantation Management is an autonomous organization under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. And the Division of Food Processing Business Management take it as a pleasure in hosting this program for you. So I wish you all the best, and there's a lot of learning in this session. So with this very briefing, I hand it over to Dr. Rana Selva to introduce the guest for you. Then with that, we'll start off. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon good evening to one and all present. So it's my pleasure to introduce the speakers of the day. So today we are going to see it is an industry academia meet on transformations in food systems. So this is in continuation with the past two webinar conducted by IIPM. We found there is a need to have a industry and academia combination to bridge the gap. We have this webinar. I would like to introduce our eminent speakers of the day. Today we have Dr. Prakash, former director of CFTRI Mysore. He is going to handle a topic on future industry-driven academic program on food business. Welcome, sir. Followed with we have Dr. Suresh Babu. He is from International Food Policy Research Institute, Washington, USA. Today he is going to speak about COVID-19 and food policy and agriculture program implementation. Welcome, sir. We have another speaker, Mr. Industrial Expert, Mr. Giridhar Rao. He is a Vice President, Global Operations, Griffith Food. He is going to speak about nutrition concerns and changing face of consumers. Now I request Dr. Prakash, sir, to hand over the session to him.
Yeah, one second before Dr. Prakash speaks. I request all participants, in case you have any question, please put it in the chat box. and we will be presenting that question on your behalf to the speakers. Thank you, sir. Sir, over to you, sir.
Thank you, John. I think it's a great day for all of us to meet each other. And let me wish all of you a wonderful day ahead. We are all either locked in or locked out, whatever is the situation. But one thing is for sure, the food industry. I would also request everybody to mute the mic so that we have a clear voice of one person who is speaking. That's better. With that, I know there is a challenge today for all of us, whether in the educational institution or industry or policy making in the government, as well as from farmer all the way to the consumer. Each one of them have a challenge in the system. When we look at the whole food system as it is, as one chain, there cannot be any single isolation of any sector in the whole chain. That's because one is so interrelated to the other, and you can't skip a link in the chain, neither can you jump the chain to another chain. Food industry is such a broad word. It is like telling cosmos. What do we mean by cosmos? We have everything in there. So it is very, very difficult to address all issues of food industry as linked to the transformations as today's topic. But I wish it was much more focused. But at least in my talk, I would like to focus so that we drive home a few points. My focus will be mostly on the impact of such a pandemic on the pre and post COVID-19. I don't think the post-COVID-19 is around the corner. It's going to be a long affair. So when we look at pre-COVID-19, in any way, we had the WTO and we had the TRIPS in place. We had the export-import embargoes and all the way down to some nations with self-sufficiency like India, very proud about it. We remember at this time Professor Swaminathan, but also the multiple number of small village, cottage, and medium industries that drives almost 85% of India's food industry. And therefore, it is this cascading effect from the cottage industry to the global industry, what food industry is made of. It's not that what you see in the market, a cup of noodles or an instant coffee. It's beyond that. When we look at all these sectors, it's not one sector. It's not just meat, fish, and poultry. It's not just eggs. It's not just cereal. It's not fruits and vegetables. It's not dairy. It's a whole list of them. So we need to really look at all of them in a very generic way. In a 15-minute span, which I've already spent 3 minutes, it is not easy to spend all the time in all the sectors. Therefore, let us address 3 major issues. One is, what if this virus was foodborne? There are many problems in the world when food industry collapsed with a lot of problems around. When the infection was foodborne, luckily, this particular one, virus is not foodborne. In general, virus or not. So therefore, that is a very big factor. So first of all, if we have in mind that it is foodborne infection, please remove it from your head, and it is not foodborne. It is a contamination through human to human, and basically one need not so much worry that the food has to be sterile, otherwise you have COVID-19. No. It can be a contamination because of somebody handled it and passed on to you, but at the same time, when we look at processed foods, pretty safe. In that angle, what the number second point is, what the educational institutions like IIPM has a role to play here. I think the first thing is the students, the faculty, the research fellows, the researchers, the startups have to know quite a bit of biology, which I feel is generally lacking in a group like that. We need to know a lot more about this virus. We need to know how it functions in the body, how it binds to the proteins in the body, to the tissue, how the protease acts on it, how it gets delinked, and how does it form the clots. Why does it only specific? Why is it specific only to the tissue in the lungs, etc.? So I would urge each one of you to take a short webinar course somewhere on structural biology of COVID-19. Then you would appreciate it much better, how complex is the situation. The third point I want to cover quickly is, it is also important we look at the whole chain of the food. I call it farm to fork, F-O-L-K. Most of the Western systems address it as F-O-R-K. But I think under the Indian context and the Asian context and the African context, I would address it as fork. And you have seen my book on farm to fork. Basically, the food that is grown is transported. In spite of many problems of the so-called low-income countries and developing countries, this problem of food migration to reach the consumer has been fantastic. Let us applaud the chain. The entire chain is working so well. Not even a day there is a shortage of food to the consumer. This is amazing in spite of the lockdown. So how did that logistic work? That whole logistics is management logistics, and how with partially industry being closed, it is working. So we need to look at that and make it a very big project in IIPM to understand how did it work. Nobody ever knew that it will work, and there must be some brain behind it to make it work. There are many countries, the most advanced countries also are suffering from movement of food because of various reasons, because of labor shortage, etc. But in here, the tremendous success happened in India because of the localization. Dairy milk in India doesn't travel more than 50 kilometers. That's where the trick is. So therefore, from globalization to localization looks like a very big advantage in the management of food distribution in the system like this, whether it is a pandemic, COVID-19, or any other thing. We have handled tsunamis, we have handled earthquakes, we have handled floods, but this is something different. And therefore, what is so regional and what is so doable in a region, in a sphere, in a radius of about 40 to 35 kilometers is fantastic. Not that everything can be grown there, but to a large extent, there's a sustainability factor built into it. And it is here that we have to learn from what is called as low-income countries, but high-brain countries. It is very, very vital. Korean's dairy industry taught all of us that milk shall not travel more than 50 kilometers. It is wonderful to have this model for a pandemic. That's why in many regions, wheat from Punjab did not come to Bangalore. It is a very different story. So therefore, it is here when rare materials cannot be transported, what do we do, the food processing industry? A farmer can never reach the consumer directly just like that. So in between is the food processing industry. And without this industry, I and you cannot have breakfast, dinner, or lunch or snack. It's impossible. So the role of food industry is so critical that even if you say trimming a vegetable in the village and sending it to a city is a food industry. Please don't downgrade it as a cottage industry. It cannot value add. No. Converting wheat into wheat flour is not only one industry, but at the same time, looking at a local situation of value addition. And not only value addition at the primary level, secondary level, but also tertiary and quaternary level is very, very important. So therefore, I and you cannot grow tea, but when tea is grown, when it is converted into tea leaf and packed, and then you have a wonderful hot cup of tea in the evening, the amount of technology, the amount of innovation, the amount of logistics, the amount of safety that goes into it is super duper. It's unbelievable. But it is here, the emphasis of food safety is also very, very vital. Why I say food safety is vital is, it is not only COVID-19 as a safety factor, but at the same time, the food in this pandemic situation cannot be by any chance unsafe. It will create a horror. It will create another pandemic. Therefore, it is very, very important that the safety in the chain has to be maintained. And that is quite good in the world now, except a few cases here and there. But I would also say the deaths from starvation and hunger in many parts of the world is more than COVID. So therefore, in a global pandemic, we ought to also look at global agenda like Africa. People in India may be a little bit lucky, but except for the migrant labor who face some problems, that's again a management problem. How IIPM is going to find some solutions for that in the next academic year may be a wonderful way to handle it. I would like to also conclude by telling food is not just sterile and hygienic and wonderful to look at, but it has to be nutritious when we talk about pandemic. It should also have composition of boosting immunity. The only way that you can survive, perhaps, is your immunity. If your immunity is just sacrificed, you cannot survive, however young you are, however strong you are. So therefore, till the vaccine arrives at your arm, which may be only a vaccine for one strain of the 9 strains of the COVID-19, you have to survive on your own. You are alone. Even your close relatives cannot help you. On immunity, you are alone. So therefore, you need to boost up immunity. And that is very, very important in a pandemic. And that the food industry has today realized. And the processes are changed quickly to convert some of them to be rich in vitamin D, to be rich in vitamin A, to be also rich in zinc. At the same time, a good amount of other vitamins like vitamin C, etc., are being supplemented on a food basis and also on a clinical situation, on a capsule basis or on a tablet basis to make sure your immunity fights. You also have a responsibility to eat the right food. The industry cannot give you a menu. You need to select the right one. The amount of leafy vegetables one has to eat, the amount of gooseberries, amla, and similarly the citrus fruits one has to take is all balanced to a nice extent, including a banana a day keeps the diseases away. So how much knowledgeable you are, you need to carry it to others also. You can't be selfish like your immunity. You need to spread this awareness of health and immunity and food connected to each other, which you have to protect yourself till the vaccine comes to your door. The vaccine is not in immediate limelight. It is in the limelight of news, but it takes at least 18 months plus even another 6 months. And please remember, out of these 9 strains of COVID, only 1 or 2 strains may have vaccine, still the other may not have. So vaccine is all not that the end of the game. In fact, the strong immunity is the fundamental one, which you can really do it yourself. I would like to emphasize, don't blame food industries and others, but you have to do a large amount of exercise to really build in that immunity and at the same time keep your lungs active. Just eating nutritious food won't make you healthy. So it is a combination of all this along with food industries that works in this post-pandemic situation and the pre-pandemic situation and on the pandemic situation where we don't know where we are right now. We are at the beginning, we don't know. We are in the middle, we don't know. We are at the fag end, we are not sure about that. So therefore, a long way to go. And in this long journey, I'm sure the IIPM graduates shall play a very major role with their knowledge of food science, food technology, management, all put together to make sure the cottage industry grows forward with a boost almost to the tune of about 5 lakh crores of rupees from the government today. And I think it is important that we remember that many of them may have closures, but a large number of them will survive. And because food has to be there, and the food industry is one industry which will close last. All other industry may close, but the food industry shall close last. Remember that. If that is closed, the world closes. So I think we have a dangerous optimism there. We have a confident optimism, and let us not be paranoid. Let us not be shaken up by the world news of statistics. Let us believe in a strong system of food chain, both in India and elsewhere, and let us build that food chain into a very strong unit around the globe. If the globe wants to know how India is doing, we are very happy to share with it. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Rana, madam, if any questions is
Yeah.
there, we can ask. Yeah, please.
One question from Mahbul Alam. He have asked that how to ensure that food supply that reaches our kitchen is safe from COVID.
Already mentioned to you that you follow all the generic hygienic conditions of washing whatever you buy and so on. On the processed food, you don't have to worry, except on the packaging, you might have to kind of clean it with a small solution of detergent. But otherwise, your hygienic practices of WMD, wash hands, mask, and also keep the distance, that will continue. So whatever you do in the kitchen, that has to be there. And take into kitchen those materials that are cleaned, that are very well washed and taken into the kitchen, and not directly from the market to the kitchen directly. Because your bag that you are carrying might have contaminated on the ground when you kept it somewhere, I don't know, on the floor. So it is important for us to follow all hygienic conditions and then be very clear about what we really select. So we can be confident, even though we can't test every food that you are going to eat. But one good habit, at this time, if you are doubtful, better to eat all cooked food rather than raw. It's one good way to do. But how long we can be without raw food? So therefore, it's a choice. It's a choice that we have to make, and we have to make a very informed choice. And I'm sure one should not be too much paranoid, because too much paranoidism also reduces the immunity. So then you blame the food, you blame the COVID, you blame something else. I don't think that is correct. Okay, that's my quick answer to you. But even though it deserves a long answer, but we have no time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have another question. Does that also, I think you have answered already. But still, is there any demand for the food supply due to COVID-19 after the situation?
Somebody has to mute the mic, and I'm not clear about the question. Food supply and demand is forever as long as there are human beings. It will never go down. It will only go up. But what goes up is food losses and waste is going up every day. And that's because we have in plenty. And therefore, it is that one we have to reduce and make sure what is available is well distributed and not lost or lost. And I would like to say more food is lost because of regulators at 12 o'clock in the night, rather than losses by developing countries and low-income countries on which the blame is put that you lose more food by your transportation. I'm sorry, as an author of the book on food waste and losses and management, I know that it is very important for us to consider. Many times regulations are the ones which make the food losses and waste much more prominent than anything else. So waste less food and be conservative. And just because the food supply is kind of fairly consistent, I don't expect that you should overdo it, overstock food and make your home a small supermarket in the paranoidism of COVID-19, as though the world is going to end. If your friends and relatives don't have food, you also don't have food. But such a day will not come, because food is important. And it is vital that we think very positive. And yeah, you can store food for a week or 10 days or 15 days, but not for 5 months, 6 months. Yeah, 5 bags of rice, 22. That's not good. I cannot hear. Yeah.
Dr. Reddy, yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for the.
Thank you. Thank you. All the best. And I'll be around. And in the end, also, we come back in the panel discussion, right?
Sir, to Prakash, sir, you can unmute directly. He is going to, because it is, this question is very lengthy.
So you any more question,
Joseph
Dr. Reddy?
Bristow. Yeah, Joseph Bristow is asking question to Dr. Prakash sir.
Okay, he can put it in the chat box.
It is there. It is there.
Yeah.
But if you unmute directly, you can ask the question, sir. Because it is a big one. Okay.
I suggest can we really look at the big questions in the end of the panel?
Yeah, that would be better. Once the next speaker presents, we will come back to that.
And if there is any one or two more short question, okay, one or two short questions, we can quickly take it and allow the next speaker to speak.
Yeah, that's perfect, sir. I think we'll
Okay,
go ahead to the
wonderful,
second
wonderful.
speaker.
I will look forward. Thank you.
Yeah, please. Thank you. Yeah. Rana madam, can you introduce the second speaker, Dr. Suresh Babu? Then we'll start.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir. Now I request Dr. Suresh Babu to hand over the session to him. He's going to speak on the topic COVID-19 and food policies in food agriculture program.
Thank you, madam. And good evening to everybody in India. It's in the morning here in Washington, D.C. I hope you can hear me. Now, it is a very nice segue from what Dr. Prakash has given us key 3 important messages that he said it is not the COVID-19 doesn't spread through food. It's not a foodborne disease. Also, we should have knowledge of structural biology. I really like that message to the young generation, which is not in the biological world. And also the farm to fork, the spread of the food industry going from the village to the global markets. And that gives us another dimension that I will be talking about is the policy dimension. As Dr. Prakash said, we should be aware of what is biology doing to us, or what biology plays, what role biology plays. And we should be also talking about what is the broader policy environment brings in. So that's my speech. The 3 messages I would like to leave here is this: policy at the global level and at the national and local levels are interconnected now. That is the message of COVID-19. COVID-19 brought both the health systems and the food systems together. That's why we are talking now. Both food people, health people are coming together. That it's called now One Health, One World kind of movement, which started, of course, about 10-15 years ago with the Ebola and SARS and so on, but it is gaining momentum. That's the first message. So we cannot be working in isolation or single disciplinary in nature. That's a message Dr. Prakash also gave from the biology side. The second message of my talk would be the food systems that we are talking about, and the policy systems are now increasingly interconnected. They have been connected, but now we have to take a fresh look at how these 2 systems interact and operate together. That's the second message, and I will be talking more in detail about that interaction. And the third message is that, like any crisis that we face, there is always an opportunity. And what is the opportunity here? And Dr. Prakash talked about the positiveness and being in a positive mode in this situation. There is always opportunity to fix the systems in terms of both the food systems and policy systems. And we will give some examples of that from India. And India shows a lot of lessons from this kind of interactions of policy system and food system to the rest of the world. And that is mainly my talk and my messages. I'll quickly go into the next set of slides that I have prepared if they are bringing it up. Second, I have overview of my presentation, basically, which I have just given. But the important question we are asking is, how does the country, India or any other developing country, how do the countries respond to this situation? And what is the implication of this COVID for the policy processes? How do we make policies under this situation? That's something that we can think about, because the policy making process itself has implications for food industry, and what food industry should receive as policy messages for policymakers to reorganize, realign readjust themselves to meet the needs of the day in the context of COVID-19, for example. Then we'll particularly talk about how to strengthen the food systems and how to strengthen the policy systems as well, and some lessons from India. So going on, there are several publications now they are talking about, you name it, every op-ed now is about COVID. You open the newspaper and they are talking about how the sustainable development goal may not be achieved, or we will backslide, and how food system and policy system should change in larger sense. And the important thing is, what are the basic questions that we should be asking in the context of policy making? Who is making the policy, whether at the central level or at the state level or at the local level, and how these policy responses have potential to transform the food system. And in that process, we can also learn for the future how, when there is a man-made or natural shock, that we can be prepared in terms of responding from a policy perspective. And we are going to be talking about that in the context of COVID-19. And what does this COVID-19 mean in terms of our operational lessons that we can learn? How do we characterize COVID-19, for example, right? It is an health emergency spilling over to other sectors. We are now talking about the food sector, food and agricultural systems in general, but it has implications for overall economic systems as a whole, right? Employment opportunities, movement, transportation, but it also gives not only the challenges, but also gives opportunities to understand how the policies, institutions, the technological change, the governance should change, for example, and human capacity to bounce back from a crisis such as COVID-19. And we are talking today in this talk particularly about the food and policy systems interaction in this context, right? So moving on. The question that I started to ask in the beginning is, how do countries respond? Countries respond to the situation depends on many things. And we place in this talk emphasis on how the policy system is organized. And we saw the example of not only at the central level, starting with our Prime Minister coming up with uniting the country, for example, in Mr. Modi, gave some signals of how to unite the country against a pandemic that is so huge to face, right, for the mankind. And he also gave examples of how states can take it and run with it, decentralized policy-making process, and how this policy-making process works at the state level. And is this system reactionary, or it is well thought through? Do we have early warning systems in place? What is going to happen? Data information systems, the information that we need in terms of making day-to-day changes in order to address the pandemic? And what is the evidence behind this policy-making process? Do we consult? Do we dialogue? Do we debate, as the one that we are doing right now in this panel? And how do we generate information through blogs and briefs and knowledge bases? But how we use those information that is generated out of this debates and dialogues and information knowledge sources from knowledge sources in policy process is fundamental to understand. Otherwise, we'll be just talking and policymakers will be making policies on their own. How do these two interact in the context of food systems as well as policy systems? That's what we are going to talk about. I just want to give quick introduction to the food systems so that the students who do not have the overview of this will have an opportunity to go beyond this talk and explore themselves. And as you know, in the last 5-6 years, we have recognized food system as a whole. The fact that the book Dr. Prakash wrote about Farm to Fork is basically a food systems book. It goes from the inputs that we apply to the land to the consumer who is eating at the end of it, right, in terms of nutrition and health. So that's basically in between all that Dr. Prakash talked about is food systems. And food industry, processing industry, or even local processing plays an important role in that. But then we need to understand the whole gamut of the players and actors in the food systems. That's what we call spaghetti diagram that I'm showing right now on the screen. But again, it brings in all the elements, but it depends on which angle that you are coming into this food system. So in your case, you may be coming from the food markets, food processing, food industry, food processing, food wastage perspective, but there's a whole lot of dimensions that are acting and interacting and interfacing in order to bring the final outcome that we are looking for, whether it is immunity or nutrition or health outcomes, right? So, but then this kind of spaghetti diagrams where everything is put in and then one is connected to another has to be clearly understood from the perspective that you are coming from. From the policy perspective, and in the context of COVID-19, I've kind of dissected that food system in this kind of kaleidoscope diagram. Basically, you are trying to, driving these food systems towards the nutritional outcomes. And that requires, physical access to food, quality food, food safety that Dr. Prakash talked about, but also economic access. And that's where the issues of do people have income if they don't go to work under COVID-19. They are sitting at home, particularly low-income wages they have to earn every day. And what about options in terms of transforming the food system itself in terms of regulations that Dr. Prakash talked about? So that these drivers, the immediate drivers, come to work towards the nutritious food system. But then there is a whole lot of other factors that we need to look at. The production systems, the market systems, processing system, food safety, how they stored and distributed, and what implications these subsystems have for policies and institutional management at the national level. Having said that, I'm just quickly going to, this is the kind of approach that you can take if you are studying the food system from the COVID-19 perspective or from the perspective of any other natural shocks or man-made shocks that are affecting the mankind, right, your society. Then what questions we can ask in the context of food systems and COVID-19? So I would first ask the question of what opportunities for us in food systems itself that we can organize better. The thought process of dairy cannot go beyond 50 miles, and was one of the thought processes in the early stage of development of the dairy industry in India, and that still holds. And that is the kind of ideas, reform thinking will change the food system to meet the demands and meet and bring the suppliers together, right? And we already talked about the food safety regulations and institutions. Can we think about it little bit more, better organized? What about the street vendors? How do they organize themselves in the context of COVID-19? Are they still operating? They should operate, but what are they doing? Preventing food losses, we already talked about. I'm just going to move on. But in terms of food consumption pattern, it's also important, the point that Dr. Prakash raised. And who is eating what? Why are they eating? Are they changing because of the situation right now? Do the rich people stop eating fat, sugar, and salt, for example? It's all fundamental problems in our health system connecting the foods. Or the consumption of nutrient-dense foods are changing. The immunity issue that Dr. Prakash talked about, right? They're all interconnected. We can ask these questions and organize ourselves according to how people are changing or how people should change in terms of their behavior, right? Food consumption behavior and also hygiene and wash behavior, and that WMD that Dr. Prakash talked about. So these are all opportunities for us to think through and what can we change and how we can change and how our own behavior, individual behavior that we talked about can change, because individuals are the ones that can protect themselves irrespective of what happens outside, right? Excellent message from Dr. Prakash on that. So I'm going to move on to this now policy system, which I am particularly working on for several years. And policymakers have to understand food system, and the food system operators have to understand policy. Otherwise, it doesn't work in terms of getting the results that we want to get. Often we see there is this bifurcation of policymakers making policies without understanding fully what is happening. And while policymakers and policy advisors are advising without getting into the field. That's why we have in our institute an unwritten kind of a rule that if you are going for a field work, at least spend for a week, at least spend 1 day with the farmers on the field, on the farms, and understand how the food systems operate. So from that context, I bring in the stages of policy process, how policies are made for the benefit of the students particularly. It's basically considered as a cycle of, identify the problem of the policy, what policy we need to fix it and bring it to the agenda, and then do some analysis of what are the alternatives for you and help the policy decision makers to make that policy. It's not enough to make the policy, but also implement it so that the results of the policy is on the ground for the people for which we are intending this policy, and also monitor the impact of the policy in order to revise the policy. Policy is not a written statement for 30 years or 40 years. It has to be reviewed and revived and corrected as we go along. So that's a policy process. But how do we understand the policy process? Is a methodology to understand the policy process. Why policymakers make policies the way they want and the way they make. And understanding that is very important, because we can actually help the policy making process itself to make right policies. That is something that we are working on. I want to give some glimpse of that in the context of COVID-19. And that's where the excitement for young people can come in terms of understanding. As you are going to understand biology, you can also understand the policy making process, right? So, so this is a model that we came up with. I won't deal with it, but it's a journal article in Journal World Development, recently published, worked on it for about 5 years, and then looked at what are the driving factors for a policy change. Who makes a policy? Who are the actors and players? And at what stage they make the policy? And what are the capacities and institutional capabilities of these people making policies? And under what pressure that make that policy? That's something that's very important for even policy researchers to understand. Otherwise, they will not place their policy evidence to the policymakers in the right time, or what we call policy window. When the window opens, you want to present the right information at the right time so policymakers can make policies. Otherwise, policy making doesn't happen on its own. And if it happens, it can be a wrong policy. It can have a disastering kind of effects on the outcomes. Now, in this context, we have a set of guidelines that we follow in terms of follow policy changes. Under what condition, the question we ask is under what conditions the policy change happen. And I want to answer that in the context of COVID-19 in the next few minutes, if you can stay with me. So in the policy system context, right, and the COVID-19, there are a lot of opportunities that we are looking at. We have been looking at how people, poor people, particularly vulnerable people, are addressing their food insecurity and hunger right now. And what are the programs that are on the ground and how they are modified and implemented. To give some example, states are implementing the public distribution system, school nutrition programs, ICDS going on, how all these programs are being changed in order to address the COVID-19 condition. For example, that's something we should understand. And what is happening with this employment opportunity, like NREGA programs, right? Increasing income so that access to food can increase. What's happening to the supply of perishable commodities to the market under the marketing conditions, and the transportation problem that farmers are facing, the perishable commodities that are sitting in the farm at the farm gate, not going anywhere. And how about market access to the consumer? Yes, we are having enough food, people are getting enough food, but what are the constraints under this situation? And what are the nutritional and health outcomes of this kind of situation that we are facing in both supply and demand side of the COVID-19 situation? It's something that we want to ask from the policy angle. And I put all these questions because these are all the ones I see in the Indian newspapers right now that people are writing about. My own colleagues from Niti Aayog to state level people are writing about, right? So this is the question we are fundamentally asking about. So what are the implications of that? One implication of that is what happens to the policy itself. The huge policies, I will give 2 examples of that. May 15th, 2020, the Prime Minister Nirmala Sitharaman came up with a very important set of policies on the food system, right? We need to understand that. The first one is the deregulation of the prices of essential commodities that were going on for more than 50, 60 years, even pre-independence, what's called Essential Commodity Act. Okay, that deregulation has important implications, not only for COVID-19 conditions, but beyond. And it's going to change the system in which we are operating as a marketing system, the food system, and so on. The implications are more private sector opportunities are there, more investment in agriculture can come, not only in production systems, but also in storage, distribution, and so on. And it's going to increase the competition. And also, and we are hoping that this policy course will continue. The second example is the Agriculture Produce and Marketing Committee Act, that in similar way helps the farmers to sell wherever they want to sell. There is no restriction on selling, free to sell anywhere in the country. Efficiency of the markets is going to increase, for both consumer and producers. It will benefit. At the same time, it creates competition and choices as well. So this is, just want to give a glimpse of it. We are studying this, what will happen to this policy change in order to see the food system changes that are going to come along with it. That's very important to understand, even for the processing industry, for example. And then we are still thinking about how the various actors and players can play the role in this changed environment, right? What are the policy think tanks, like even your institute, IIPM, can do in terms of understanding the situations? How can you prepare yourselves as a research organization or an academic organization to cater to the needs of the challenges that COVID-like situation can bring in? I just wrote a paper on that just for you to use that link eventually if you want to look at that. So final slide, what are the lessons that we can give from India? It's a fascinating kind of area to look at the interaction of the health system, policy system, and food systems coming together. And that requires particularly a multidisciplinary nature of thinking. It's not just you have to be a biologist or a policy scientist or a health system scientist or a person in the marketing system. You got to understand what is happening. Okay, that crisis brings us all together as a multidisciplinary team. That's important. And we have been asking some fundamental questions about policy reforms in the food markets in India for more than 30 years, since we started the economic reforms in the early 1990s. Nothing happened, but all on a sudden, the COVID situation gives an opportunity to open up the policy process and even overcome the opposition that people were facing, policymakers were facing in terms of reforming the food sector. And several task forces and commissions tried to reform the sector. And even the Food Security Act of 2013 tried. But then this crisis gave an opportunity to opening up the markets in the food. The policy change that came on May 15 is a remarkable breakthrough. And that's a big lesson for us in the policy process. When a crisis comes, policymakers actually can make use of the crisis to make policy changes. Let me stop with that. And Dr. Prakash mentioned Professor Swaminathan's name. Maybe it is appropriate to put the slide where I discussed with him several aspects of food system changes over the years and learned a lot from him. And I, at this stage, want to thank him also for his contribution to my knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a good insight for us to know that not one person can involve in the policy. All marketing people, policy makers, every health inspectors have to be combined. Only then we can make an effective policies. Now I would hand over the session to Mr. Giridhar Rao. Welcome, sir. He is the Vice President, Global Operations, Griffith Foods. So, he is going to speak about nutrition concerns and changing face of consumers.
So thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll just share the screen. I will start with the presentation. Can you see the screen?
No.
Okay, I'm not very good at this. Just hold on. Okay, is it visible now?
Yeah, you can make it in
Okay.
slideshow mode. It is good. This is also okay.
It's not in slideshow?
This is okay. This is perfect. Okay. You can go ahead.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me for this session. I hope the presentation is going to be of use to the students as well as all the others who are sacrificing their Saturday evening to attend this. I've been working in the food industry now for nearly 30 years, and I also been associated closely with IIPM over the last 10 to 12 years, and a few of your students have been working in Griffith, and also a number of them do their internship in Griffith Foods. It's always a pleasure to interact with the young people from your institute, and we are mutually benefiting from this interaction. Griffith Foods, just to give a very brief introduction, we are a global company. We are a B2B company. We make several intermediate food products for the food industry, like seasonings, food bases, coating solutions, and so on. So my role in the company, I look after sourcing of spices and herbs, and I have a small team whose main agenda is to work directly with farmers. We talked about traceability, farm to fork. So we spend a lot of time in that area. So this particular today's topic is also new to me because it has to do with the consumer side of it. I have been in the sourcing, yet I will try to do a very good job of this so that it's of use to all of you. So moving forward, today's topic, it's about how this crisis is affecting the behavior of the consumer and how the food industry can adapt to take advantage and create opportunities out of this. So as we can see, the current crisis, the previous speakers have spoken a lot about this, how it has brought about changes in the way the society operates. And due to this, how consumers have made significant changes in their lifestyles. People are not consuming food the same. We also, feel that this change is going to persist. It is not a short term. Some of it may evolve some more. However, this change is there to stay. So that is what we call as the new normal. And we in the food industry need to, paint a picture of what the new normal is going to be and try to make changes to take advantage or to handle the new normal. And this is not only for the food industry as such, but also for the associate industries like the logistics, supply chain, the packaging industry, which are very closely associated with the food industry. And this is required for us to be able to do well and also contribute to the society. And we will discuss some of the opportunities and ideas that we have identified in Griffith Foods is going to be the new normal and how we can take advantage of these opportunities. The first and foremost, change is that the takeaways and deliveries, as we all know, are changing. And a survey done recently shows that people are eating at home more. They are not going out to eat because of obviously the fear of contracting the virus. However, this is going to not going to change in the sense that people will continue to be wary of going out and eating for a long time. And takeaway ordering is on the increase in many. Of course, my presentation is focusing on APAC region. However, this is true in most part of the world. Takeaway ordering and food delivery systems are gaining popularity. So, the lockdown has restricted movements of people, which means that they need to stay home more, order food, and prepare food at home. So, this is likely to continue after the lockdown, and people are likely to eat out less and stay indoors. So what happens? Most quick service restaurants, have already developed the ability to offer takeaways and deliveries, and they are going to capitalize on this. Also in this region, especially in Asia, the Asian region, there are a number of food delivery systems which are already operating, such as Foodpanda, Uber Eats, Swiggy is very popular in India. And these are all going to act as enablers for this change to happen and expand. And really, we are at a stage, we are seeing that this model is likely to take off in a very big way. So most cities and also the smaller cities in most countries are seeing that consumers are preferring to take home or get the food delivered at home. So this is we see as a major trend. So how do we take advantage of this? In the food industry, first thing is we have to create new products to cater to this new requirement. For example, fried items are also very. As we can see that fried items are one of the most popular items in the takeaway segments. So how to keep them crispy for long? So create products that will add to the crispiness of the. So this is a new segment that is going to be in demand, and ingredients that can enhance the food safety for transported food. Food needs to be now transported more because they have to be delivered. So how do we ensure the food safety during this process? Innovations that could preserve noodle integrity during and after delivery. Mostly, when noodle is delivered, it is not as fresh as you would like to be. So how there is going to be much higher demand for products that prevent clumping of noodles and overcooking and those kind of things. Maintaining consistency of sauce, again, in this new environment, the sauce during the process of transportation and being delivered can change its consistency. Again, there are a number of products that will be in demand that will prevent this. Again, keeping food fresh and prevent sogginess in products like French fries and pizzas, freshness of salads, and keeping the flavor integrity. Because flavor integrity is very important, because first of all, consumers like their food to be as close as to have the flavor if they have cooked themselves at home. So this is a challenge for the home delivery company. So products that will help preserve the integrity of flavor would be in demand. Sachet packing and sauces seasoning all require small packing, which will complement the home delivery systems. So what does this mean to the supporting systems? Like supply chain needs to be more efficient, especially what they call as the last mile delivery systems. Use of technology in managing order processing, storage, inventory management. The food industry is seeing this change. People are more and more ordering online, and the entire supply chain needs to be managed through cloud-based system, which will bring in a lot of changes in the way we are currently operating. And food safety, nowadays it is very difficult because of the restriction on transport or travel for people to actually go and audit facilities, audit supply chain, inspect. This is going to change. So there will be more emphasis on cloud-based apps to establish food safety, quality, and traceability, and eliminate synthetic ingredients, pressure on the natural ingredients in this. As people, order food from outside more and more, they would, again they would emphasize more on keeping the food clean, healthy, and free of synthetic ingredients. Perishables, there will be, we are seeing an increasing trend in sourcing closer to home. Moving perishables over long distance is going to be more expensive, and people would be looking at solutions to source perishable vegetables and those kind of stuff much closer to the consuming centers, which will therefore make urban farming concepts or farming close to the consumer center, like vertical farms, would become more popular, and emphasis on freshness rather than long shelf life. Because food needs to look and be fresh when it is delivered. People will shun products which have long shelf life, and of course, refrigerated vans and those kind of delivery systems will also be in greater demand. Just an example of one of the, of course, this is yet to become popular, but a lot of investment is happening in vertical farming or urban farming, where the food products are grown much closer to the consuming centers. Second trend we see happening is meal kits, home meal replacements. This is because increasing engagements with consumers from the retail or consumer value stores is seeing a very increased trend, increase in their popularity, identifying customers and segments offering meal kits or tap into diet meal plan business. So people who are in the food sector needs to partner these companies, who are offering these kind of convenience food to the customers. Inclusion of meal kit solutions as part of concept presentations would also present a big opportunity for the food industry. You can see here, a survey done shows again that people are staying at home more and more. So they are looking at, stuff like home kits, and also there should be a focus more on homemade feeling has to be generated. So the food has to be more authentic. And there is also going to be a proliferation of backyard or home-based operators that would potentially be able to capture the business through e-commerce and distributor partnerships. So this is another change we see. Some of the examples of these changes you see here, that products like these, already restaurants, because people have stopped going to restaurants. So restaurants are reinventing themselves. They are creating frozen food packs, which can be home delivered as fresh as possible. The consumer only has to heat it and then start consuming. And also diet meal plans businesses where a complete, wholesome meal is packaged and delivered to customers. So these are some of the new developments that are happening, which means that, businesses like central kitchens, catering, those kind of businesses will see some additional demand in the post-COVID scenario. Again, we are seeing growth in the retail sale of food products. Why this is happening? Because people are staying more at home, and there is a boom in the food products sold through retail shelves post-COVID. And this trend is going to be there for a long term. And like I said, people continue to spend more time at home, which means there is going to be good demand for stuff like processed meat, canned foods, snacks, packaged snacks, cup noodles, instant foods, and ice creams, frozen desserts, and so on. So manufacturers who are in this area will see we need to gear up to handle the additional demand that is likely to come. So food creators or food companies also need to look at opportunities which would come out of natural preservatives, shelf-life extenders, salt, vinegar, those kind of products. We'll see an additional demand because food preservation will, using natural ingredients will gain ground. Custom-made and innovative seasonings to beat the competition, since more and more companies are going to enter this. People who can, create good seasonings that would replicate the authentic taste would be in demand. Ingredients that preserve the natural taste of foods, innovative packaging that not only attract consumers on the retail shelf, but also extends the shelf life. Demand for perishable grown closer to retail centers will increase. Innovative products like low oil absorbing coating solutions would be in demand. Snacks, because people are going to consume more and more snacks. So an example is they would like to see low oil content in the snacks they consume. Normally, when you take a packet of chips and start eating, your fingers, they become soggy or oily. So those kind of solutions which will prevent that would be of interest. So we are seeing, I give a live example from our own company. There is a product called Conserval CL, which we had created about 10 years back and then shelved that product. We found at that time that there was not much demand after we test marketed. However, now, based on our research, we have reintroduced this market. We revived this product, which is basically a product that will, extend the shelf life by controlling the microbial growth. So this is an example of how things are changing and how a company can adapt to these changes. home cooking, we have seen, is becoming more popular, again, because of the fact that people are staying at home more. So more people are choosing to cook themselves instead of dining out. And this leads to increased consumption from the retail side, as we have already seen, but short-term canned foods or prepared meals may be preferred. In the long term, people will find joy and pride in cooking from scratch. So the people would like to say that I cooked it, I did it myself. So products that will, provide that kind of a feeling to the housewife would be in demand. And what are these products? Fresh groceries, gourmet sauces, seasonings, spice blends that give authentic note to the food, and healthy food and diet-specific foods would be preferred, in order to cater to this demand. So what do companies have to do? They have to develop more seasonings and tailor-made products that will cater to the local tastes, private label opportunities with retailers, and marinades and seasoning mixes that help to convert an ordinary cooking into authentic and a great taste. Because a lot of working housewives will be forced to spend more time at home and cooking. So products that will make their cooking more tasty and more authentic, like the marinades and the seasoning mix, would be in demand. Ready to cook, again, for obvious reasons, there will be more and more demand for ready to cook. We are seeing that this change is happening in the European market, and it is soon likely to catch up in Asia, in India. So again, here, completely home cooked experience is very important, and innovation should be there. Although it is ready to cook, but the housewife or the chef will have to experiment, add his own taste or flavor to the food. So that is going to be important. And ready to cook packaged foods, soup mixes, gravy. Soup mixes are basically you just boil water and put the mix and you get soup. Gravies and sauce mixes, semi-cooked products, products which are already seasoned, cleaned, seasoned and prepared, especially in the meat industry, and which are almost cooked but not fully cooked, which the housewife can take home and complete the cooking. Those kind of products will be.
I just want to make sure that there is discussion, because we have another 15 minutes.
Sure,
Otherwise,
sure.
I might have to log out, and
Sure.
you may lose me. Thank you.
Yeah, I will finish it in another 5 minutes. So frozen and ready-to-cook products, especially for the non-vegetarian segment, and frozen pizzas, these are some of the products that will see more and more demand. Next comes health and nutrition. Because of COVID-19, it has reinforced the importance of having healthy and immune system. People will look to enhance immunity to ward off future diseases, not only the current ones. Products containing known immunity boosters would be sought after. Examples are botanical, turmeric extracts, ashwagandha, and so on. And you can see some of the innovative products like the moringa, or the drumstick leaves is becoming very popular. And because it is supposed to not only have a higher level of nutritional values, but also immunity boosting properties, health drinks, and products with known health benefits, high fiber foods like millets, resultant starch, banana flour, products with high level of natural antioxidants, products known to be cancer inhibitors, low sodium, low potassium products will be in demand more and more. Herbal teas and infusion, basically more and more products in this segment are being introduced. And currently, those herbal tea, which are supposed to be immunity boosters, are seeing a very, very big demand in the global market. Some of these products are turmeric, elderberry, sage, mountain tea, rosemary, with high level of antioxidants. Also, some of the conditions that need to be taken care of are heart, depression, weight loss, digestion, cough and cold, and diabetes. So herbal teas basically are, you just boil them in water and filter out the solids and then drink it, either hot or cold. So because you boil it, a lot of nutritional ingredients get into the liquor, and it has high bioavailability. So whatever you consume, most of it gets absorbed by the body. So that's why there is going to be good demand for these products, which are considered to be health, wellness, and curative in nature. Plant-based proteins, people are going to reduce the intake of meat products because of the fear created by the COVID virus. So what would be the alternate source of protein? So there are going to be big demand in we have also a lot of surveys show that, and the vegetarian foods with high protein content, chickpeas, lentil, green peas, so there is COVID has created a need for these kind of products, which will replace meat in the diet of more and more people. Large institutions also, because of the restriction of traveling and other things, there would be big demand coming from the healthcare sector, the military, civil defense, and welfare and services. So a lot of institutions other than healthcare, schools and hospitals, they would be requiring solutions. So companies would be doing well if they can, tailor or fashion solutions for catering to large groups of people who would be found in these kind of institutions. Online, companies cannot survive without, investing in getting online. Online means not only the supply chain, but also how they promote the products, how they interact with consumers, how they source raw materials, how they interact with the farmers, how they interact with suppliers. All that thing is going to become more and more online, and people will have to adapt to that. So this is another big trend we are seeing happening. So we need to build an online presence, social media platforms, capitalizing on brands, build partnership with distributors to create e-stores or build own e-commerce platform, like working with companies like Amazon or Big Basket would be one of the big changes that we are going to see because of the influence of COVID-19. So this is some of the key trends that we see happening as a result of COVID-19. So I come to the end of my presentation. I hope I have been within the time limit.
Yes, sir, very much. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. I think there will be few questions. Dr. Rana and Channakesha already can post the questions, and requesting all panelists to give your answers. Just before that, just 2 minutes, we have Professor David Bosworth joining from Royal Agricultural University, Cirencester in UK. Can you please give your insights, sir, please? Professor David Bosworth.
Hello, can you see me? Let me just put my video on. Hi, everybody. I thought that was very informative, and a lot of the information provided in the last slides I thought was absolutely spot on, and I did take a few notes. Veganism in the UK has taken off very much so in January. We had Vegan January, and then we had COVID-19. And what we've seen is a lot of people have embraced not eating meat as much and cutting down their meat consumption. And so some of those trends we really are seeing. We're also seeing that businesses that typically weren't online are now online. So small farmers are now offering, you can buy meat online through Facebook, through sort of non-traditional online purchasing methods. So these trends are really starting to change the way people buy things. And of course, if you change somebody's habit, they become a habit, and they'll change for the rest of their lives. So we are seeing that people over the age of 70 will probably never go back to a supermarket. And that's incredible, that what they purchase today, they're having on a repeat order every single week, and they'll never go into a physical store again because they're just getting it delivered. So all these trends are actually very powerful in changing the way that we purchase and we supply food across a diverse population. And this is actually incredible time. So as an entrepreneur, I think it's fascinating that we have so many opportunities at the moment, and the world has changed forever, but actually there is opportunities to make money there. So yes, the last three speakers I really empathize with, and I really saw a lot of the data that we see there is exactly happening. I think the one thing I wrote down was in the UK we have a health minister, and we have a minister responsible for farming and food, and the two never ever talk to each other. It's a sad time, but hopefully today they will start to talk to each other.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. Thank you. Some questions? Well, Rana madam, can you unmute Rana Chanakeshwar already? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Please
We
go
have
ahead.
a question from Mr. Joseph Brito. It's not a question. He's asking why not we have CFTRI for food research. Similar to that, why not have different research institute in each processing units in different places, like in each district processing unit to be there? What is the requirement for establishing those kind of units? That is what.
Yeah, I might give an example. Wherever there are airports, that doesn't mean you have to have a Boeing or an Airbus factory there. Not possible. You need to invest money in the right place with a consolidated effort and take that results into innovation and results into the industry. And industry will establish around the country with their franchise. And based on that, regulators come into picture. And on the top of it, people like Suresh will come into the policy factors. And therefore, if you have for every street, every town a CFTRI, you will be investing 1 rupee per day and not 1 million per month. And therefore, you can't have aircraft manufacturing centers wherever there are airports. That is my answer. It may be a little bit brash, but it makes it clear. So we need consolidation. We need, a global advantage and local solutions for many. Let me share with you the amount of work that CFTRI does is not only for each state or each district, but it is for the global situation, and also in the policy matters in terms of preventing the losses in the farm all the way to regulations. And it is a codex laboratory, and therefore it has to be a final authority in telling a food is either safe or not safe. So there are a lot of other responsibilities, and you can't have a Supreme Court in every headquarters of a state. So therefore it is very important that there is an amount of focus. But there are a lot of KVK, Krishi Vigyana Kendra of ICAR, which also works closely with CSIR. And CSIR has got its own laboratory of 37 laboratories in the country. All that is chained into 175 research institutions, almost averaging to about 5 or 8 per state, which also does a lot of these interactions. But however, in today's world of communication, we are all in different parts of the world. We didn't travel for this conference. So we are connected, and connectivity makes us a different ballgame altogether. So therefore, your question is good and excellent, but this is where we are today in using the resources intelligently, judiciously, and also very clearly focused. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. We have another question from Sanjay. What does supply chain and cold chain in India lacks when compared to other countries? And also, what are the scopes in future in India?
This question for whom? For me?
Any panelist? Giridhar Rao sir can answer, or Suresh Babu sir?
Yeah, I can. I think the cold store capacity in India has been increasing year after year, not only because of the private sector is investing a lot of money, but they are being supported very well by the government, who has the last 10 years back seen the need for this and have provided subsidies and those kind of help to the industry. And I think if you compare what the situation was about 10 to 15 years back, we had almost 3 times more cold store capacities of various types in the country. And because we are such a big country, it appears to be not enough. But I see that because of the the efforts of both the government and the private sector, this is something which is really increasing day by day.
Thank you. Madam, there is, I think, I don't know, anybody has noticed, there is one question. Any international project is on to rectify the COVID-19 consequences in food supply?
Yeah.
Maybe if Professor Dr. Suresh Babu can answer that.
Oh yeah, there are a lot of projects that are coming in, and even the existing projects that we are been doing are being repurposed for the purpose of addressing the situation. So it's not the depth of projects we are talking about. What really we are learning from this experience. If it is going to be a new normal, how are we going to be coping up from the production side to consumer side and in between? And that's more fundamental, whether it is international project or local projects. And I don't see any difference, as it's a globalized world right now. And we have as much to learn from a South African situation or a Brazilian situation as an Indian situation for UK or US. It's
I think there is some network issue. Yeah, Professor Prakash sir, can you continue?
I think the international and national scenario have today merged into one because of a common situation that is affecting all of us. There are a lot of issues which come into play when we talk about project at this point. It's not project, it's actually a realignment. And realignment is the one that will work for food industry for tomorrow. And food industry is also going to learn a very big lesson from it, that they cannot and should not kind of overproduce and waste in such an extent where the people do not have much food to eat. So it becomes much more community packages. It's not that a half a kilogram of bag for an instant upma. They might have to look at 25 kilograms for a community cooking. So these becomes the new normal, where huge amount of instant foods will come into play. And this is not only here in India, but everywhere in the world, because of the labor problem, because of the pandemic. So therefore, more than the project, it is the utilization. Suresh is back, and maybe you should continue. Suresh.
Can you hear me now? I'm using the microphone.
Yeah,
maybe there was some situation there. I was saying probably what you are saying, Dr. Prakash, that it is not international or national. I was giving an example of Amul and how it actually was a locally thought out problem solving, and it really did solve the problem in the context of what we were facing at that time. So the idea behind local solution can be applied to globalized world is still applies in this situation. So there is no need for an international project to solve everything. And the capacity, the governance, the policy, the institutions and regulatory systems that are in place are more important in order to facilitate the solutions that are coming out from the local conditions. And that need not be one solution in UK or France or US is better than what we do in India or in Brazil or on South Africa. So that needs to be kept in mind. The solution can come from anywhere, but in the context of addressing the problem in the locality, but then lessons can be learned for rest of the world. That's what I would be saying. But there are a lot of international projects that are coming up, but they are all what I call donor-driven projects. So it will come and go when the donor money is run out. I mean, there is no more projects and you go home, right? What is sustainable is very important. What you put in place on the ground is the human capacity, the institutional capacity, and the policy systems in place so that we can run with what our knowledge is, what our solutions are. Thank you.
That's right. Very true.
Thank you.
Very
Thank
true.
you, sir. Yeah, you can
But I
proceed.
might add one point, Suresh, to what you said, to kind of completely agreeing with you. In this whole chain, the industry, I didn't see in Giridhar Rao's slide even one sentence about farmer. It is assumed by industry that farmer simply grows and that's all. After that, he is no more. Why the dairy project is successful with Korean? Because the producer is involved till the end. So we must take that as an international policy. And this is applied in New Zealand, this is applied in Denmark. So sometimes a solution like that takes it a long way. So I think this is the time, at least the food industry must wake up and look at the woes of the farmer and not only select good tomatoes and leave the tomatoes back in the farm. They need to project in such a way that we all work together and not take the cream and leave the rest to the APMC market for the general public to buy. The good ones go to the industry and the rotten ones come to the market. No, I think today industry has to hold hands. If they don't change, the farmer will have a new norm altogether. I tell you, things are going to be different. He's well informed today. So I would like to give that caution that the industry need to work closely with the farmer, because without him, it's not possible. And even the general public will really suffer if the farmer decides not to produce. I think John and myself or Suresh or Giridhar cannot grow paddy in our house, cannot grow wheat in our house. It's impossible. And I just wanted to mention that in this context, we must look at minimally processed food rather than maximally processed food, because the carbon footprint is not feasible today. Carbon footprint is too high for the products that Giridhar showed. This is not sustainable. And we are looking at a sustainable world. And COVID has told us and taught us that unless the system is sustainable with the climate change, we are not going to survive. So anything that we do must be sustainable and lowest carbon footprint. And 1 liter of milk in the world that is produced, India's milk is the lowest carbon footprint, 1/10,000 compared to other countries. That's why number one, we are number one. We are proud we are number one. And nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about it. And I think I care less, whatever it may hurt anybody, but we are number one. Why? Because of that policy matter. And thanks to people like IFPRI who are working on such policy matters and conveying that to the rest of the world to follow models, even though we are called as a low income and developing country, but still brains are there because of need. Innovation, innovation, and innovation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Anyone, people from academia, I thought that someone from Coimbatore and Trichy, some HODs of Department of Technology people are there. Okay, just if you want to interact with panelist and all, okay, just you can raise your hand. Otherwise, you can put some message. Okay, we will interact. And Trichy, some people are there, sir. Okay, they have someone. Okay, just raise your hand and then now we are going to know about you.
Yeah, meantime, the question from the chat box, can you read 1 or 2 questions for the speakers, please?
Yeah, Ananta from Annamalai University. Doctor, are you there? Okay.
Yeah, I think I'll just ask one question. There is one question from Mahababul Alam. What can be done to ensure proper implementation of policies in the ground level so that it can be observed? There are many policies which are only in paper and not working at the ground level. Yeah.
I guess I can take that.
Yeah, please.
That's the whole issue of the purpose of studying the policy process. That's why I wanted to introduce that concept itself, because for long, not only in India, developing countries, emerging economies, even in the developed world, it is a subject of only last 20 to 30 years. And the way in which policies are made and how the actors and players in the policy process come to a policy conclusion, and how do they take that policy to the final kind of implementation and the impact, is something that we have not understood very well. And we are beginning to, even policy researchers, even because they do thematic research on policies, market policies or production policies and so on, they don't really understand policy process themselves. So they write a journal paper and throw it there in a journal paper. They get an academic, permanency or tenure, and then move on in life. Who cares what happens to their policy research, or who cares who is using that policy research? And that is something that we need to really worry about. And this is a fundamental question we are asking. We have been asking, but who is answering this question, right? And unless we understand the policy system, why certain policies are made under certain conditions, we will not be able to guide the policy process. And we don't want to worry about it, because I'm particularly interested in, say, a consumer economist will be interested in studying consumer patterns and throw a journal paper and then go home, get his promotion and retire at the end of the day. But whether the policies, research is being used by a policymaker to change the programs and conditions on the ground is immaterial to him. That's how the policy think tanks work throughout India, or for that matter in many parts of the world. But more and more at the global level, we are asking the question, who is using this information? Why are they neglecting certain information? Why are they using certain information? And how do we understand that process? It itself is a research process, of course. And also you have to get involved in the policy process to understand that. And this is why I gave the example of why for the past 30 years in India, the emphasis on removing the Essential Commodity Act and also APMC should go away. People have been writing about it. Nothing happened. All of a sudden, COVID crisis comes, and then government sees this opportunity and also sees the need for getting rid of this so that farmers can benefit, consumers can benefit. So it's a classic example of a case study. When the crisis hits, if you can actually use the opportunity to bring in certain policy reforms, and that can be sustained over the years, it can make things happen. Now, for example, the implementation again is an issue, but in this kind of examples I gave, private sector can come in and it is free to operate now. Implementation automatically takes place. The implementation is a problem when it is actually the government or the public sector gets into implementation, right? So that is something that we need to understand as well. But again, you can give examples of the extension system as a public sector operation and the private sector doing extension also in the industry, right? If you need good quality tea, you are going to go to the farmer as a private industry and make sure the tea is supplied in good quality. And there is no public sector extension in tea because the industry takes care of it. So there is a difference between public sector implementation of a policy and a private sector implementation policy, and that needs to be understood. And the example of public-private partnership was given, right, in cold storage. That's another example of implementation can happen. But then how do you open up the opportunities in the credit sector, in the financial sector, and also in the infrastructure sector for the cold storage to come in and operate in a public-private partnership way? Subsidies are nothing but a private-public partnership. So we are basically helping a private sector individual to come in and take advantage of the need for the entry, as well as facilitating the process, right? So there is one group always against the subsidy, the other group always for subsidy. That's not the case. We need to identify where the limited resources for facilitating these public funds can go into making things happen in the areas that things are not happening by the sole investments of a private sector. And cold storage is a good example. So implementation, depends on policy. Policy has to be in line with the public-private, operations on the ground, so that we can do the right policies, make it happen at the implementation level as well.
There's a similar question, very similar to that from Sugandha Rajamani. Can farmers be included in the policy making process?
I think it's a very simple answer also, because the more and more farmers are organized. Now we are talking about farmers producer organizations, farmers associations. More and more farmers organize themselves. It is easy to play the role of in the policy process. But again, farmers have to be educated also to become part of the policy process, right? And you have farmers associations. I deal with them all the time in Indian context. And I know several several farmers leaders. What they do is, in the policy side, they say, oh, we don't have farmer in this meeting. Let's get a farmer. So one representative farmer will come, and this farmer speaks in many of the meetings that I've been attending. And just these personal problems, or he just puts a very limited issue that on the policy table and goes, and the policymakers record it as a farmer attended this meeting. On the other hand, real issues of the farmers do not come into the policy process. The policy process itself has to open it up and dialogue and debate. And in fact, we wish we brought another farmer in this panel as well to see the farmer's perspective, right? So that's the way to go. So more and more involvement, but the organized sector, the value chains that are organized, they are better integrated in the policy process, while the unorganized sector, the monoculture, like cereal producers, ragi producer in Karnataka, for example, in a remote area of dryland district, may not be integrated in any of the policy process, right? So that's where the public sector understanding of those issues and challenges becomes very important. But integration of farmers institutions in the policy process is fundamental for success. Policy making. And that's why in the West we can learn some. The Dairy Farmers Association, they promote milk, for example. They are sitting in Washington, where I am working. There is a Dairy Farmers Association building in Washington, lobbying for the dairy farmers of the United States. I'm just giving an example. And it is nothing but policy process engagement, but in more a lobbying kind of format. The format is different, right? It can be also harmful if the lobbying takes to other dimension of pushing the interests of individuals and individual groups of people. But policy process need to include farmers. There is no doubt about that. And we have come a long way in India. But there are some problems, as I mentioned, but we need to do it better. Thank you.
I think we have crossed the time, but with your permission, if you permit, we can take one or two quick questions. The panelists, if you permit us.
I have answered a number of questions in the chat box because I took the time to answer about 10 questions on the chat box. It is good that people go through that because that's very important. That will save a lot of time. And there is one question that after my talk, somebody put it, it said it's a long question. We said we will come back to you in the end. I think it will be unfair if we don't give a chance to that person.
I think that is being answered. Mr. John Brito was asking the question, if I'm right.
Okay. As long as that is taken care, it's fine. I have one question to Giridhar Rao, very small question, a brief question, and one to Dr. Suresh Babu.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Giridhar Rao, Dr. Giridhar Rao, when you look at multiple products that you talked about, in the emergency situation of what happened with the migrant labor or what happened in tsunami in the 2004 calamity and what may happen in future, we don't know. How does the industry quickly push into itself into social service within 12 hours? Within 12 hours, because you have the infrastructure, but many of the industries keep quiet and they want research institutions to work and supply. They want something else to be done, NGOs to come in. Why is that differential treatment by the industry? When things are going good, you make profit. When things are in pandemic, you retreat. And so there must be a way to give back to society, not through corporate social responsibility, but through concerned social responsibility. What is the backup situation that you have? Yes, here's the pandemic, within 12 hours, we are into picture. We don't worry about the cost of it. We are here to help. That should be the attitude. Will that happen in industry, or is it a dream that I'm seeing in my life?
No, no, it will. It is not only it is going to be there. It is been there earlier also. When there were floods in Chennai, for example, when there were floods in Kerala, the industry has been. I can only talk about my industry because I don't know what others are doing. But we have really geared up by creating products that can be similar to the easy to cook kind of products, which were sent to in shiploads to in truckloads to Kerala and Chennai when there was floods and other areas, which are very convenient for the consumers with very minimum utensils, minimum effort to prepare the food, and with high nutritional value, which can be quickly distributed. So this product can be easily prepared because it is already sort of pre-cooked, and only the you can just boil, and it's very high nutritional value. So we were able to, I can share the number of trucks and those kind of details by a mail.
Yeah.
But we have been really gearing up.
But my only point
and,
is, can industry join together and make it a system approach rather than an individual emotional reaction? It should be a system approach.
It is not an
No,
emotional
I think it is
reaction.
needed. Some of you should take the leadership.
Yeah.
And
No, if you have the
approach.
patience to allow me to complete.
Yeah.
So this is during crisis. But as a company, we also believe in the concept of doing well by doing good. So I did not talk about farmers because I think you missed my introduction where I said that I am basically a sourcing guy. I spend a lot of time buying from farmers, working with farmers. However, today's topic is more of from the consumer side. So that's why I focus more on consumers. Now talking about this, what we do as a company, we have tied up with almost, we are the founder members of what we call as the Bangalore Food Bank, where we have tied up with more than 150 NGOs. These NGOs are in the field of old age homes. They are in orphanages of destitute children, taking care of those kind of people. And we have tied up and we have brought the industry together. Britannia is one of the members of this. And there are many such companies who contribute a lot in terms of the creating food products for this.
Yeah.
And we have a central where
Current on the
it is very important when it is translated to a country, and that becomes a local problem solving, and we need probably a satellite group in that country to interpret that policy to give the local solution. Because if at a drone level looks at problems with a very different level, I mean, I'm sorry, if at a satellite level, but we also require a local situation which will look at a drone level and take that policy and translate it to a local level and try to give the solution. But at the same time, there should be experts in that, and then give back the feedback for a correction of the policy back to IFPRI. Would that mechanism is in place, or do you think that will be really something that one should look at?
No, that's a very fundamental question, Dr. Prakash, you are asking, and we have been asking that question for 30 years. And actually, my program within IFPRI is primarily looking after this drone level challenges. And you are putting very figuratively. I'm very glad that you can think of that levels. Sometimes we do work at we have our own drones, for example.
Okay.
In the countries, we have a New Delhi office where our Indian scientists are working closely with ICAR, National Agriculture Policy Institute, Niti Aayog. I personally work with Dr. Ramesh Chand in Niti Aayog all the time. So we do have that kind of drone level interaction, and we do some research together. but it doesn't happen in all the countries. You are right. And India is one of the countries that we have worked for 45 years now, from the beginning of Dharam Narayan and you name it, the earlier policy scientists were visiting scientists at IFPRI, to the extent that IFPRI was initially called, it was Indian Food Policy Research Institute in Washington. Because there were so many Indian colleagues came to IFPRI and then they came back and started working. The National Agricultural Policy Institute now we have in New Delhi is primarily designed by Professor Dayanand Jha after that, how we do work at IFPRI. I was not there at that time at IFPRI, but I joined later. But to say that Indian conditions with the drone is working very well with the satellite, and drones are actually working on the ground people. But it's also, we are facing a lot of challenges which are very common to any policy making system, because the political economy situation has to be understood. I gave this example, right? For 30 years, Congress government or Mr. Vajpayee's government, they were all trying to do how to dismantle this Essential Commodity Act. Here, it happens overnight. And we struggled with this. I wrote several papers on this, recommending, you got to go beyond this, the famine conditions we faced before, in the 60s and before that, when Essential Commodity Act came. Now we are still strangled by that act. It is good in that condition, right? So I'm giving an example. So we do have a lot of challenges in the policy process itself that we need to understand how to disentangle. So India-wise, we are doing very well in that for IFPRI. But Africa, we are missing out. And I'm working in several African countries. We don't have that strong drones flying there. So we are strengthening that system there so that we will have national systems fighting for their own policy change with the informed policies that can happen on the ground, and get the feedback, like you rightly said, back to the global system that this is on the ground, because many of the global systems don't really understand the local problems and cannot convert that into a global public good through that research. And this is very fundamental question you have asked, and I'm glad you thought about that. And we have been working on that for some years. And I personally, I've specialized in that area of policy process, how to take.
Wonderful. I had a long discussion with Professor Shengan, who was
wonderful. Shengan is
a couple of times in China.
Yeah.
And so it's a great occasion to discuss about it. And it's very important for this seminar, John, that some of your faculty students must also go into policy matters. How to really get into that is a very intricate situation, and not counting the trees but looking at forests, and with all their management situations, I think some of them should get a dose of policies. How do you enter the regulator policy? How do you enter the global policy making? I think they will make a big difference, both for industries like Giridhar Rao, and also for the industries and institutions. And it is that makes all the difference. Like playing in the Ranji and then Test match and then IPL and so on. It's the same logic here also. So
thank you.
It's not that we always look for policy from somewhere else. Whereas we can really be training people towards that. And there are institutions like IFPRI which can really encourage students into the nice charter of tomorrow's policy makers for the region, not only for the country, for the region and for the world. So I think that's where leadership counts. And your institute can have a big impact on that. And I would certainly say a semester course on that would be wonderful.
Sure, sir. Sure. Your points are well taken. In fact, ever since we introduced the course on food processing and business management, we made an attempt to, bring in both technology and the management aspect together. We will definitely look into the policy dimension also into that.
I know from the first day.
Thank you so much for your association with us since beginning.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think, shall we close in case the speaker wanted to add something?
But I again wanted to ask people to read the chat. I don't know where will you host this chat, but there are some answers there people can read.
We have noted all the questions. We will be pleased to share.
You can circulate or do whatever is needed. Wonderful. And I think on behalf of the speakers and on behalf of everybody, it's a great thing that you have arranged. More frequently is good. and focused topics are more important. This is fantastic. I hope the benefit has reached everybody.
Yes, sir.
And
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you very much. And it's
Thank
a
you,
pride
sir.
to
Dr.
participate in
Chanakeshwar Reddy, one word of thanks to the all speakers, formally on behalf of Institute.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir. Yes,
please.
sir. I'm ready. I'm waiting.
Yeah.
Really, it is what was a wonderful thing to observing and also seeing the people also, sir. Honestly, I can say that first, Prakash sir, okay, many your students are there. Okay, I thought that okay, you don't know about their background and all. Okay, I thought appreciate CEO Dr. Saikad Datta is also there. Okay, he is listening your words and also he already given
I have replied to all of them in my chat.
Yeah.
Yeah. They are feeling so much happy to see you. And I would like to say that, okay, you are my panelist also in assistant professor selection. Okay, you have taken more than 25 minutes time for me. Still, I remember. Okay, it is a wonderful experience. Yeah, I would like to brief all the things. Okay, scientifically, socially applicable way also. Okay, scientifically, sir, Dr. Prakash sir has given a lot of insights, and socially, Suresh Babu sir has given insight related to policy making, something like that, and then applicability. Even Mr. Girdhar Rao sir from Griffith Foods has given some insights. I hope that all people who are presenting here still some lot of interest is there, sir. Actually, panelist, I would like to tell you, previous session is closely related to only students. Now this session is related to certain type of academicians also and industry people also. Okay, they are just listening. They don't want to ask anything. They want to see what you are going to explore, because that type of people you are. Okay, we don't know the certain type of digital what we call technology to create brochures. They will see our IIPM logo. That's all. Okay, immediately, okay, something informative thing is there. Like that, they will get a certain type of assumption in their mind. Okay, I hope that all participants. Actually, thing is, sir, okay, if you make it as a what you call discussion manner and all, okay, it will go to entire day. I can say that. Because they are that much of interested people are there. They want to interact with you, and also they want to ask some questions. They want to take, because in previous days they don't have this type of opportunity. Actually, honestly, I'm telling to you, sir. Okay, while taking interview to in IIPM 2 years back, I don't know about Dr. Prakash. Okay, he is looking like white and white and also asking the question, okay, something like that. Okay, why he is asking this many questions? That time I don't have any idea. Now many people, why they are showing so much interest towards the persons who is ex-director of CFTRI. That means he is a bank of knowledge, right? All people, they know that thing. At the same time, Suresh Babu, Ifri, okay, he is related to academic related aspects. Here, clubbing together, even Girdhar Rao is Griffith Foods is not only a simple organization, it's a world-renowned organization. Like that, people are who are having right now. See, just imagine that 67 participants still they are listening our words. They are our output. Even Abdul Kalam also said one beautiful word about our India, the strength. Sir, one 7th class girl asked this question to him. Sir, what is the strength of India? What is the strength of India? It's nothing but you are the strength of India. Okay, just imagine that the entire world youth. Who are the youth? Okay, we are the youth. The country, why we are leading to other countries and all, why afraid about India? Because of we have that much of youth power. This is the, see, our director already instructed to do this type of under IIPM academic social responsibility. Just imagine that. Okay, many people they don't know about this thing. Even IITs are there and IIMs are there. Okay, what they are doing, okay, we don't want to question that. Simply, I can say that academic social responsibility, how many universities are doing, how many companies they are doing it. I can say that even Giridhar sir, Rao sir is also there. Okay, they are telling that it's corporate social responsibility, but how it is going to give certain type of impact on public. We are very little organization, but we have strength. That strength we have to utilize in proper way. That is our director's what we call strong suggestion. Okay, that we are going to implement now.
Reddy, your voice is breaking. Can you just close? I think it is breaking.
All are there. Okay, you.
I also suggest you should bring out a small write-up of 1 or 2 pages on this.
Yes, yes.
And circulate it, because that will put in documentation, not necessarily who said what, but capture the point.
Sure.
And that will help a lot in documentation. Otherwise, it will go into the air and into the cosmos. And so
we have
thank you.
Already recorded this entire event, sir.
Right. Thank you very
So we are
much.
doing. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Dr. Prakash, for spending your valuable time. Thank you, Dr. Suresh Babu, for joining us. You know, we have I think thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And I was really excited to hear from you after 2 years. Meeting you in your office. Now I'm seeing you through Zoom. Thanks to the technology. Thank you so much. And thank you to Mr. Giridhar Rao. Thank you for your valuable insights and spending your valuable time. Griffith is also in association with our institute since long in multiple ways. Thank you so much. Please continue to have your association with us. Thank you so much, sir.
All the best.
Thank you, Professor David. Thank you all participants for staying with us for such a long time. Wish you all good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.